Baptist pastor would say, that decision and the reaction to it has been the most disruptive experience of this last 15 months. We've navigated things, I think, so beautifully throughout this, but this CDC decision a few weeks ago that's not true anymore. I'm feeling a greater amount of tension and kind of disunity than at any point along the way.
Blessings to you in the name of Jesus Christ, and welcome to Pastors for Pastors, the podcast that supports and celebrates pastors. It is exactly a year since the first Pastors for Pastors episode was published on the first week of June 2020. Now, I didn't start this podcast to follow the pandemic's impact on pastors and congregations, but it has turned out to be that way. Today we join 7 pastors, most of whom have been with us about every 3 months for the past year, to see how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected them and continues to do so, even as we live into what hopefully is the light at the end of the tunnel. Joining us today are Charlie Lee, Senior Pastor of Starmount Presbyterian Church in Greensboro, North Carolina; Ernie Thompson, Pastor of Westminster Pres in Greensboro; Ron Shive, Senior Minister of First Presbyterian Church in Burlington, North Carolina; Travis Milam, Solo Pastor of First Presbyterian in Pilot Mountain; Randy Harris, Senior Pastor of Highland Presbyterian in Winston-Salem; Kim Priddy, Pastor of Sedgefield Presbyterian in Greensboro; and Kathy Beach, Lead Pastor of Rumpel Memorial Presbyterian Church in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. It has now been 15 months since the pandemic closed down most of our public gatherings in the United States, so let's listen in on how things are going for these leaders. The first of these podcasts was almost exactly a year ago. It was 3 months into the pandemic, and I just wanted to check in first of all in a general way and ask you all to talk a little bit about where your congregation is now compared to what it was a little over a year ago, and some of that you may not know. That may be part of the equation. Charlie, you're at the top left corner of my screen. Why don't you start us off and talk a little bit about your congregation?
Thank you. I think in a short phrase, everything has changed. We're still in this transition period of returning to indoor worship, where it still feels different and looks different. At this point, we still don't have a great idea of who will we see week in and week out at programs and worship and fellowship events, who maybe have, established some new patterns, and how often will folks just feel real comfortable at continuing that live streaming thing. So I think we'll still be in flux. At least around here, we kind of talk about, I don't think until the fall, we'll really know kind of what community looks like, what the new rhythms look like, what the new patterns look like. So in some ways that's, nothing is sort of normal and regular, but in another way, it is nice in that we get to be much more intentional about saying, okay, well, if that's the case, it doesn't mean we still can't do all the things that we feel like are critical to our mission. We just have to figure out how to do them in different ways. Our methods of connection just have to continue to evolve and change. And so I'm actually, while on the one hand, fairly weary of, COVID protocol meetings and where are people going to sit and do we have to wear masks or not and those kinds of things. On the other hand, actually fairly excited about some of the deeper conversations we get to have about what does it mean to be a part of this community? What does it mean to worship and to serve and to love and to be active in the community? So both tired and excited at the same time.
Randy, how about you? How are things different for you all in more detail than everything?
Right. Most things. How about that?
Okay, yeah, it's good.
We are. It's been interesting. As all of y'all have done, a year ago we were still in the process of deconstructing everything in person and reassembling it for online use, sort of building the plane while we're flying it, as lots of folks noted. And now we're doing the same thing, but in the other direction. We're trying to figure out, how to land while a lot of the plane is still staying up in the air. And so we have returned in person for worship, but outside. And it's kind of fun. We have discovered our own front patio slate. We have a slate patio out in front of our sanctuary, which is canopied by massive oak trees. And we've had members who have said, once we're like back in the sanctuary normal, can we still have worship services out here, and especially in the spring and when the weather's nice? And so we've recognized that we have discovered some good things from this past year, and we don't necessarily want to lose those, but we're in the process now of trying to figure out, to borrow Charlie's word, everything. What comes back the way it was, or as much as it could be? What's it time to let go of? And what have we started doing in this pandemic time that we want to keep doing? And how do all those things fit together in some combination of in-person and online? And those are the conversations we're in the middle of right now.
With a smaller church, they were kind of resistant to change. They weren't real thrilled when we couldn't meet. And so recently we've been meeting past couple of months in the Masonic Lodge in Pilot Mountain, with restrictions and everything, but we're probably going to be meeting back in the sanctuary in the next few weeks. That's the hope. We've been building a fellowship hall and redoing the areas there, but they had to learn what it meant to be on Zoom some, because we did Bible studies and a couple meetings that way. They've had to learn, how to use email to get to the YouTube links and Facebook to get to the links that I've sent out of services and things like that. So we've changed a little bit in how we've reached out, but not much else has changed. They kind of like, well, we've always done it this way, and I'm kind of trying to push them, going, yeah, but this way isn't going to be the same way all the time. We're still working at some of the change, but also having the resistance to the change as well.
It doesn't necessarily matter what size the congregation is in terms of how hard it is to change. Smaller congregations can be just as resistant to change as larger congregations, maybe sometimes more so.
We have, we wake up every morning and wonder which way the wind's blowing and where are we going today. And we've really seen that in worship in the last 2 months. In 1st of May, we went back to 2 worship services, one at 8:30 that was in person in the sanctuary with mask. The 10 o'clock service was live streamed. Now this Sunday, we're going back to 1 worship service that will be in person with congregational singing, mask wearing, in the sanctuary. So it's, everything's changed. It just seems like it's changing every week. And that's what's difficult and also frustrating. So not only worship, but I guess the one thing that we're really trying to figure out now towards the fall is our education and faith formation ministries. All of our Bible studies, everything was in person. We've gone to all Zoom, and we've continued really those Zoom Bible studies, but what will they look like in the fall? Will people come back? Are we going to end up doing them both in person and Zoom? I don't know. That's going to be rather interesting. The other thing that of course, everyone has changed is with regard to staff. And And no one was in the church office until July of last year. And then staff returned from 9 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon. And our personnel committee has just made the decision and session that we will resume normal staff hours and staff presence starting the 1st of July. But interestingly, our financial administrator is out on maternity leave now and has made the request when she comes back, can she work the mornings at home? Well, what do you do for one? Do you do it for all? And so I don't know where we're going there. It's we're kind of feeling that out. So
we're in more of the too soon to tell category. So we've been worshiping outdoors. This is our last Sunday outdoors. We'll be moving into the sanctuary. We are capping that, and so it sold out quickly, which means we probably start a second service, though with summertime, we're going to wait a few weeks to do that. I think some of our sense is the pre-recorded services were initially well received, and people certainly still say good things, but I think they're watching less and less. And that's why I think it's hard for us to tell, have we lost folks? Are they going to come back? How soon are they going to come back? How often are they going to come back? We're going to continue to pre-record and make that available on Saturday night, anytime you want to watch it. And sometime August, September, we'll begin to live stream from the sanctuary. And again, we're trying to do that. Well, we found things we really like about pre-recording, and you can do some things you can't do on a live stream. So we want to see if we can keep some of those elements. We also don't want our live stream to be a step backwards from what the pre-recording was. So we're kind of the next 12 weeks are busy for us as we try to move towards more of a September full reopening. That's when we'll start Sunday school back. Okay. We're actually taking this as a chance to change our schedule. So we're changing service times while we're in the middle of mixing things up. And talk to us again in September. We can tell you more.
Yeah, right.
Ernie, I'd be interested to ask you and others too. We have also noticed that in the last 2 or 3 weeks that our numbers of people live streaming are dropping off. Are others experiencing that? The question we're asking is that kind of, people are starting, summer's approaching, or is it that people are getting tired of it?
My sense is it's both, that, that people are traveling this summer a lot, and that's already beginning some now. Weekends, people are getting out of town. But I think there's also just some Zoom fatigue, not just in general, but for worship, that at some point it's just not the same worshiping by watching it on TV while your family runs around and there are more distractions. So, but that, that's the question is, are they tired of church or just tired of online church? And, will the numbers spring back by September, or are we going to see we've lost some folks?
Are others of you seeing that too?
I would say that's, I think, one of our challenges after this extended time apart. Like at first, there was tons of energy for people to be on Zoom and to be connected to one another, and then, or participating in online worship. And there were these shifts where after like 3 months, there was a huge drop in people attending worship online. And then after about another 6 after that, there was another drop. And we were starting to experience a third significant decline in the spring. So my answer to your question is just we're less connected to each other, whether that's the physical thing that Kim is describing or just even being aware of what's happening in each other's lives. I had a conversation with a church member yesterday who I ran into in a parking lot, and we were just saying we feel like we've lost a whole year. So for the people that we haven't seen or been with on Zoom in small groups, we don't know a lot of what's been happening in their life over the past year, except for that they, like us, were experiencing a pandemic.
We made the switch from pre-recorded to live stream when we brought people back into the sanctuary.
Which was when? When did you do that?
We did that in May, beginning of May. It started with a small group of in-person, and so we started to live stream. So in some ways, it was flashbacks of the beginning of the pandemic when we, each and every week it was, does the camera work? Does the light there? Did it record? Did the microphone not, all those kinds of things. So a little bit of that, but we're hopefully getting our arms around that. Because that'll for us, that'll be permanent. I mean, I think we will always live stream the entire service. And I think we will have a little bit of a both. And I think for some of our faithful folks who are, who attend regularly, but also love to travel, and I think they'll continue to worship even when they're out of town and live streaming and things. So I'd say our live stream numbers were fairly consistent. We'd have a jump or a dip here or there. What we're trying to do is to watch, okay, how many people are worshiping with us at our worship hour at 10 o'clock as we're in there doing it, and then how many people are kind of just watching it later, because we're finding that people share that service much more freely. So people are, we send out a link or a worship email every Sunday to say, hey, join us. And what we see is that people are forwarding that to friends or family members. Or
we are wrestling with which way we want to do it once we're back in the sanctuary. I spent some time talking to our colleague Joe Blankenship about this, who before his years in the church was at the School of the Arts here in Winston-Salem, and who was very familiar with communication in general. And one of the things that he pointed out that has haunted me, I think he's right, and I kind of wish he wasn't, was that there's a difference in how you communicate to an individual person versus how you communicate to a crowd of people. And he says when you're in the sanctuary in a normal Sunday morning, you are communicating with a crowd of people. There's lots of people around, and you're looking. But when you are recording something ahead of time online, you are looking at the camera, and that is where your congregation is. But the people who are watching are typically, maybe it's one person, maybe it's two people, but effectively it's more like an individual. And you really, part of what has made church effective in that way through the past year has been that, I've heard people say it. They have come into the office at some point and they said, I just feel like you're speaking right to me. And I'm like, well, yeah, in the prayer of confession I was, but
yeah, that's right.
But no,
wrote that for you.
Right. But part of what he's getting at is there's probably some worth in continuing to record ahead of time with that person there in the camera in view, because they feel like the church is interested in me. And so like I said, I kind of wish he was wrong about that, because we've been talking for a while about live streaming. And what we're wondering now is if we have a live stream setup, which we may use sometimes, but we use that same system maybe to keep recording ahead of time. That's one of our questions we haven't answered yet, as to which way that's going to go.
Which creates new staffing and kind of workload issues.
It's really a workload. I don't know that it's going to be new staffing, but I think it is going to be, the question for us is going to be, what gain do we have? We right now our pattern generally is to record like on Thursday mornings. The extra burden of getting everything done Thursday versus the gain of an effective way of communicating. And the accompanying piece that I'm thinking of too is that the character of my Fridays and Saturdays and Saturday night, Sunday morning, it truly, it's different now. I recorded a sermon this morning. I'm going to preach it in person on Sunday. But between now and then, I don't have my usual Friday and Saturday fretting, nature abhors a vacuum. I still have some time. I can rethink how this is going to happen. At this point, I'm like, good Lord, this thing is going to be out on the interwebs. If it's good enough for the rest of the world,
it's good enough for you.
I'm gonna be okay with this group of people right in front of me I know and love, and so I sleep a little better on Saturday night.
When you think of the TV preachers through the years, they will have the wide shots of the congregation, but don't you know that preacher is looking at the camera? And when he or she is preaching, they are talking to the person on the other end of that camera, and that has that personal approach to it.
We're asking that question Sunday: should I be looking at the congregation or looking at the camera?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sunday mornings, or both? Is there some
Exactly.
both? And I think we'll certainly do much more welcoming our live stream audience and doing some looking at the camera, but trying to figure out how you balance that. So it's really effective either place you are is the challenge.
Well, interestingly, I had people notice that this past Sunday. We had a baptism at 10 o'clock, and so we probably had 25 family members there for the baptism. And because it was actually a congregation, I found myself looking at them, but then I'm correcting myself. I started looking at the camera, and they felt that. A couple of them made a comment, and I thought, that's interesting. They picked up on it.
That's been another interesting change, is that we live stream funerals now because typically it's a smaller crowd that can make it into the sanctuary. But I think we'll continue to live stream funerals because it just allows people who couldn't make it into town
To be there. Yeah.
to participate. So there's some. That's the other advantage.
That's a good point.
The live stream.
Certainly so.
Yeah.
I do not like preaching to a camera. Our first Sunday back, I became very teary in the welcome and announcements, because you realize how not cold it is, but how when you're preaching online, there's no feedback. There's nobody smiling at you or nobody kind of giving you feedback to what you're saying, and you just roll with what you do. It was a responsibility. I've got to do this, and there's a lack of feedback. And so as soon as folks were back in the pew, it just, I got teary, and it just meant so much to me to have people back in there, and you really realize what the church is, and how much you are reliant on them to bring the good news and the gospel and to be together. So I will not take that for granted, even though we continue online worship for those who are unable to come in. And it is sad to think about too, those who we've lost along the way in the past year, and remembering where they sit and who they are and what they bring. And you realize that they won't walk in those doors again. And the last time that you did get to serve them communion or hug them at the back door. I love the back door when people are leaving, and that's even different. And so, I would like to greet people as they leave and go back out into the world, and we can't do it the ways we've done it before. And, but yeah, I think it's just going to hit hardest as we come back in. Who's missing this year because we lost them this past year. And I've learned that we are creative and imaginative and resourceful people, and that we can continue to do this, no matter what. We can continue church, continue taking care of our neighbors, and we luckily kept up all of our missions work. It just had to look a lot different.
Travis, you were starting to say something a few minutes ago.
Well, we don't live stream. It's me setting up a camera, little point and shoot camera that I set up, and I will look at the camera, but at the Masonic Lodge, everybody is off to the side. So when I have to engage them, I'm looking over to them. But my favorite is when I look straight into the camera and realize the camera has gone off. And then I go, oh, goody, now I get to go home and record this again and send out an email saying, sorry, folks, this didn't record. This is from my living room once again.
I want to jump to a question that I think is on everybody's mind. The rather surprising announcement by the CDC a couple of weeks ago, basically saying that the science says that if an adult is fully vaccinated and does not have any immunocompromising situations, they really don't need to wear masks. And I think I'm sure that surprised you all as much as it surprised me. And I wanted to ask you all how that announcement has impacted your congregation and your leadership over the last couple of weeks, and what you're experiencing now because of that.
This pastor would say that decision and the reaction to it has been the most disruptive experience of this last 15 months, except for the original, everything shutting down. We have navigated previous junctures along this way very well. I mean, I've been so grateful. I've said that many times, that the leadership of this church has been really good, and they're fairly diverse. I mean, they're diverse for our congregation, right, in terms of their sort of perspective theologically and politically. And we've navigated things, I think, so beautifully throughout this. But this CDC decision a few weeks ago, that's not true anymore. We have a reopening task force but we're trying to trust the medical people on that to sort of guide us, and their decisions continue to be what I think would be described as fairly conservative. And while the session has continued to accept their recommendations, we've had a lot more discussion, a lot more pushback, and we're also receiving that from the congregation. People don't understand why we're asking people to wear masks inside when that's not required anymore. And so there's people who are not coming to church because they don't want to wear a mask. They're not coming to church because they don't want to sign up ahead of time. And then we also have people who aren't coming to church because they're not comfortable coming inside, period, yet. So we have like the whole gamut. And so yeah, I'm feeling a greater amount of tension and kind of disunity than at any point along the way.
So our experience has been just a little different because we're a smaller congregation, and right now I have a sanctuary that can hold a large number, and we're still small numbers. When we started coming back in before Easter, and we would wear masks the whole time. And so as soon as Friday's announcement hit, I got some text messages, so we don't need to wear a mask. And so trying to balance that with what we had been practicing, I wish we had more notice than Friday. I mean, they were so dependent on us encouraging folks to stay home, and then all of a sudden that avenue of communications had to change quite quickly, and we weren't part of that. So that was a little frustrating. But we've talked as a church on a Sunday morning, just being mindful that we are still responsible to care for one another and be the best that we can be. And so we have folks who will wear a mask in and then take them off when they sit down. So we are not as rigid. Most of my congregation, if not all of them, have been vaccinated except for our little ones, and we don't have very many of those. So we are just trusting that people will continue to love one another, and they really are caring for each other.
We had an interesting situation where our worship committee recommended that vaccinated people be able to take off masks once they got in the sanctuary. We'd wear them coming and going. The session overruled that.
Is that right?
Because parents of children said, we're not ready to bring our children into a room with unmasked people or folks who are more vulnerable or guests. So we have said, we're going to wear a mask in the sanctuary. But the CDC rules were pretty gray area for churches. So are we like public transportation where you're supposed to wear your mask, or are we like a restaurant where you take off your mask? And that we didn't feel like we fit a category. So this is open to interpretation, and then the whole hospitality piece comes in too. So that it's been challenging.
And Ernie, we were at the same place. Our decision was basically we're not going to differentiate between people in the congregation, and we've got to care for our children, under 12. And so we're asking everyone to wear a mask, but the pushback has come really from our older congregational members who say, I'm vaccinated. And I had an email today saying, why can't we put the unvaccinated people in the gallery or the balcony? Well, it kind of reminds me of pre-Civil War days where we used to put slaves in the gallery. I mean, you know, you start differentiating between people. It doesn't feel right to me.
This seems bad in a church setting, but folks have also said, how do I know they've really been vaccinated?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
We've had that same piece about, you know, saying the honor system.
Right.
And the question was, if you're probably not vaccinated by now, you probably aren't going to wear the mask anyway. So, you know, that puts us all in a sticky situation. We found ourselves, COVID task force had made recommendations earlier in the week. We had a session meeting scheduled for Sunday, and they made that announcement, I think Thursday night or Friday. And so we were caught in the middle of that. And that's what I've heard from all of my other colleagues that I've talked about, is it really just felt like the rug had been pulled out from under us, because it wasn't we're thinking about doing this or we're planning on doing this in a week or two. It was, you know, this has happened and it's effective immediately. And then the state followed the very next, you know, few hours later. And we were sort of left reeling, because just as we've heard, it's more complicated for us. And so we have been struggling with it. We've met again and are going to send out a revised, you know, recommendations, but have just tried to put people at ease to say, there's no ta-da moment in this. There's no, all right, everybody's gonna, you know, things are gonna snap back, or you're not. It's gonna be it's gonna be a slow progression, and so that's how we've tried to work with everyone. Those who are upset we're not moving faster and think we should have done it months ago, and those who are not ready to do any of it yet. We've basically tried to say we're going to take a slow, steady approach as we phase different protocols in, as we phase in different elements of worship, as we phase in singing and those other kinds of things. But kind of a slow and steady wins the race. And what I told my people this week several times is if everybody's upset, we've probably hit the right the right mark in between.
Right spot.
We had a physician, which I thought was interesting on the session, who said, let's wait a few weeks and see if there's a bounce in numbers after everybody starts taking their mask off. But again, it's just hard to know at what point you say, now's the time.
What I think you maybe were the one who suggested that the press conference with Dr. Ohl here at Baptist Hospital that be sent out. Thank you for that. I listened to his press conference, listened to parts of it a couple of times, and I thought he really had some helpful stuff to say about all of that. What I found particularly helpful was parents with children younger than 12. He says, you know, those children are going to be wearing their masks. Parents will often wear a mask just to be in solidarity with their kids. And that got me thinking about what it means to be an intergenerational church family, where some are vaccinated and some aren't. And so our policy ever since the CDC change was basically to say, yes, we heard. And so, you know, masks are optional, but encouraged, especially during those times when we are greeting one another. But we still have people whose anxiousness rises when they see people without masks. And one of the things that as I was trying to figure out a way to articulate all these different things was, I shared with our session a couple of weeks ago that part of what makes all of this decision making so difficult is that we don't just have one lens through which we are regarding all of this. I mean, we're looking at it through the epidemiology and what the scientists are saying about what's okay and what's not. We're looking at it through the lens of psychology and not only individual, but also a group. How do you help people process massive change after 15 months of struggle? You know, what does it mean to be a church? And to be a family of faith where we have vaccinated and unvaccinated, and people in full and people whose health is compromised in some way.
You know, one of the things that I discovered through Dr. Ohl was the fact that even though I and folks like me who have immunocompromised situations in their health, even though you're fully vaccinated, the evidence is showing that you are not fully protected. as those who are otherwise healthy. And so even though everyone else may be fully vaccinated, if their children are not wearing masks, I am vulnerable even though I'm vaccinated. That's organ transplant recipients, that's bone marrow transplant recipients, that's anybody who is on any kind of chemotherapy, those with lupus, anyone who has a situation where their immune system has been compromised. The evidence is showing that the vaccine is not as effective. And one of the things Dr. Oles said that I thought was very powerful was we wouldn't think of taking down the ramps for wheelchairs on the outside of our churches. So why would we make it harder for people to worship who are immunocompromised for one reason or another? And we, and particularly, among denominations, we Presbyterians emphasize inclusivity. Are we going to be inclusive in our worship for everyone, particularly those who are most vulnerable health-wise?
And that's a bigger group than you might first guess.
It is. It is.
Right. And I think maybe a part of what with all of the stuff that he said about that, part of what really caught my attention is his saying that in a lot of ways for those folks, things are a lot more dangerous now than they were 3 and 4 and 5 months ago, because now everybody is starting to leave their masks at home, and you don't know who is vaccinated and who's not. And so it's riskier now than it was before.
Yeah, exactly. Because that honor system, I'm not going to trust my health to it. I'm really curious. I started out asking you all how your church is different. Now I want to know how you are different than you were 15 months ago. I have heard the words tired, exhausted, frustrated through the last year and 3 months. As you're coming toward the end of the tunnel and seeing some light, I hope, how do you sense yourself being different than you were a year and a half ago?
We do not take for granted anymore hugging each other. It's funny, as we've come back into the space together, people are mindful of each other's comfort level, but they have started asking, can I give you a hug? And so I don't think we will take for granted anymore just our ability for natural touch and hugging and being together. So
I know a lot more about technology than I did of March of 2020. Now, that's dangerous to say that, because my knowledge base is just small enough that I can get myself into trouble. But there's a lot of things that I think, to sort of Kim's final point, a lot of stretching that I've been stretched. I almost learned to like teaching small group Bible studies and studies on Zoom. I mean, one of the nice things about that is that has enabled, this congregation has a lot of people who are just here part-time, whether that's just in the warmer months or just on the weekends. And so one of the things that was good for all of that for me was to be able to keep some relationships with some of those people actually stronger than in the past because of technology that enabled them to stay connected to this congregation 12 months of the year and not just 3 or 4 or 5. And so that for me was, there's their gift in that, I think. Just so I would say that's just relationships are different that I have with people, but I do sort of echo a lot of what Kim said. I mean, I missed that. I mean, I realized that now that we've had some people around for a month, because we've been outside for over a month, just how nice it is to see people's faces. And yes, like she was saying, to have people interacting when you're preaching. Yeah, I'm not meant for TV preacher world either. I think I've just enjoy the interaction with people so much. So I think as I try to think about it, I hope that I'm not taking that kind of thing for granted either, those sort of relationships. I know one of the things that I've said over the course of this pandemic many times is exactly to some of Kim's point that she just made a minute ago about, I knew that how I learned about a lot of what was happening with people in the congregation were those casual conversations that didn't maybe seem all that substantive, but actually were at the door of the church when I learned that somebody's grandchild was sick or that somebody was getting ready to have, a shoulder operation. Those things I didn't know about a lot of times this year until after it had already happened. And so we're still slowly only coming back. Like this past Sunday was our first Sunday inside in worship together. So we haven't had as much of that time as Kim has had, but I would say that's one of the same things. We did a trial run with members of our worship committee and our reopening task force in this session a couple of Sundays ago, and one of the worship committee members, that was like one of the first things she said to me. She was like, I can hug you now.
I think I won't take for granted small interpersonal interactions the way I used to, I don't think I fully appreciated how much even the short little how are you make a difference. With the kind of tiredness also comes some excitement for a chance to be more regularly in contact with church members than I've been able to be.
I know I've been tired and a little anxious, kicking in a few things that have been latent in me, but I'm having to deal with now. But on a good side, I've lost about 30 pounds during this whole thing because I wasn't going out to eat while I was out of the house. It's amazing what drinking water can do to your weight. So that's a good thing. But on the whole, it's been kicking in some anxiety and a few things that, you don't want to talk about, but you are still there and you have to talk about. So I've been talking to a therapist as well. Yeah. But working through those, that's been the big thing.
I'd say I'm taking the license to be a little bit more creative. During this time, we just had to try stuff, and we'd see if it worked, great. If it didn't, we learned something from it, and we tried different next time. And so I don't know that consciously before I would do that, but I just think the bar was a lot higher before I would take a creative leap. I'd have to. I was much more methodical or careful about it. So I think moving forward, not being quite so afraid of that, and hopefully the congregation has gotten used to that a little bit too, of saying, "Hey, we're going to try something different this week, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll do it." Just like Randy described too, there are things like outdoor worship that the congregation has loved, and so we have many of those things we'll be able to keep from the time, and that'll enrich sort of our lives together, I think. So
from my lips to God's ears, do you think perhaps our congregations have learned to be a little more flexible?
Oh, Ken, don't say that.
We're Presbyterians, Ken.
I know.
Well, they've certainly had to live it out, whether or not they liked it or not.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we have learned some of that, and I've been impressed with how my folks have been patient and understanding that we've got to make some changes, and appreciative of kind of what we've done has been a nice part of it.
I would say on a good day, I've been able to flex and change and adapt. But on a bad day, I found myself getting angry. In other words, I'm having to plan 3 different options for a funeral, and I thought after all these years I knew how to do a funeral. And so on a good day, I can live into that. But when I get tired, I found myself getting angry. I've had to kind of pay attention to that.
Well, Ron, I appreciate you saying that, because I agree with that. And one of the things in order to be creative, you have to be rested and have energy, in order to exercise that muscle. If you're exhausted, it is really hard to be creative. So I've certainly had those same periods of I would much rather put my energy somewhere else rather than talking about, are people going to sit this far apart or that far apart, or this pew or that pew, or this mask or that mask. And so there are weeks where I'm like, we've talked that stuff to death, and it's not very life-giving. And so even having some small, I think, as Ernie said, small interactions with people, small, where classes or different kinds of things, it'll hit me in the middle of the meeting, like, oh yeah, this is why I felt called to be a pastor, not all the administrative stuff we've been having to carry. That's right. I remember now.
I find myself, again, this is part of where I don't know what the way forward is going to look like with this, but I realized several months into the pandemic that, we were recording worship stuff, usually again, Thursday morning, but then we were also doing things on Sunday. And so the normal flow of a week, Sunday, or Monday to Sunday, Monday in the office doing things, working on sermon ideas, bulletin stuff, up to preaching on Sunday. I still had the normal Sunday school session meeting, whatever, all kinds of things. But worship was recorded on a different weekly calendar. And so having those two calendars working along, I found to be one of the most disorienting experiences of the whole thing. Because I would record on Thursday and it'd be like, whew. And then Friday, I'm like, woohoo, Friday, day off. And I'm like, yeah, except that it's kind of like Monday. And so
that'll make you mad,
right? Yeah, I mean, and so and I'm still not quite over that. But what I have learned in terms of how are things different? What I have learned is that I am much more at peace with however the sermon is on Thursday morning when it's time to record it. I've gotten to be much more at peace with that than I ever was before. And I don't know if it took a pandemic to sort of break me of whatever my neurotic perfectionist, although, the product was never perfect. I don't know what I was thinking. But whatever that pressure I put on myself before, I think that's mostly gone at this point.
How many times do you record it on Thursday before you're at peace?
Yeah, well, right. And I do find that now that I'm having to do those darn things in person again, that when I flub up in the middle, there's no, okay, stop.
Yeah, that's right.
Just as my congregation can't fast forward through it, I can't redo it.
Can't start over.
But I mean, it is again trying to figure out what is that new rhythm going to be like, and I don't know yet. And part of it I love, part of it I don't. And then I have days like Ron where I'm just like, ugh.
Our recording day is a day earlier, so we have to have the sermon done by Wednesday. Which is challenging to you can't wait till Monday to start your next sermon. So
right.
You've got to kind of be in that midstream.
And then when you're recording it on Wednesday, but then doing something in person on Sunday, you're mentally already well into your next sermon while trying to still re-preach the one that you just did.
Yeah, if you can remember it.
Right. And having the energy to put into the sermon that you already did 3 or 4 days earlier that's tricky.
What are you most worried about and most looking forward to?
I think I'm most anxious about, as we are in the wilderness, like in our biblical text of saying, oh, we're in this wilderness. Can we go back to the way things used to be? Can we go back to, yeah. Can we go back to Egypt where we were slaves, but we were fed, or it was what we knew and it was what we had come accustomed to. I am hopeful that there is a promised land. I mean, we're always, there's always good news in something. And so I am hopeful that there, as we do get into this new promised land of what does church look like, that we'll create communities in different ways. I'd love to see this as an opportunity for those who gave up on church a while back, or grew up in the church and they're not back in the church. I'm hopeful that maybe the church will kind of consider what do we need to do different to create that space that folks have a sense of community and want to hear the biblical stories, and what does it mean for the times that we live in. I'm hopeful about there is a promised land. I'm just anxious that some of us want to bail and go back. So
yeah, I do love that text. I read that with church officers all the time.
Yeah, and I think some of my anxiety is, will people come back? Why have we lost folks? My hope is that it will be a new beginning in lots of ways for the church, and an opportunity. I mean, we're already using it to make some pretty significant changes, and that it will be a kind of chance to restart and rethink. And then I'm just looking forward to seeing people in person.
Yeah,
that I haven't seen regularly.
I think for me right now, a greatest worry is related to can we sort of make it through this newest juncture with the unity that we've had before? It feels tenuous right now, but I think it's really important as we reopen more and more that we do have a unified voice and there is positive energy, just because we need that, I think, in general right now, all of us, and because we have all of these huge projects on the horizon. And so I'm hoping we can do our best to see eye to eye so that we have energy for some unified projects that I am hopeful for the church's future. So then that's something I'm hopeful for. Is it feels exciting to me that we can have been through this pandemic and all of this displacement and disorientation and still have what seems like really great energy about some possibilities for expanding our mission and ministry in the future. That feels really exciting to me, and I'm hopeful for all that could mean in terms of who this congregation can become.
I know that we're going to have some strange mixture of people coming back and people not being back. We sort of know how to do hybrid stuff worship wise in terms of here's an online option, here's an in-person option, but for a committee meeting or a class, that doesn't work quite the same way. So we're working on the technology to have a group in the room and people via Zoom equally engaged in the conversation that's happening and what it's going to take to be able to do that. That's, for committee meetings too, because one of the things we've noticed, I don't know if y'all have seen this, but our attendance for committee meetings has gone up significantly during the pandemic. Part of it is that people, they didn't have a better option.
Yeah, so nothing else to do.
Right. But another part of it is that people who would have missed the meeting because they were stuck at work and they just knew that there was no way they were going to get to the meeting in time, so they just wouldn't have been there. Those people can now join from work, or the people who were at the ball field with the kids while they're at practice can Zoom from the car or, the stands. And so I think there's going to be some excitement about the fact that we're able to extend our reach through this combination of in-person and technology. Ultimately, I think people are going to want in person because there is no technology can't replace the feel of being in the space with other people. And ultimately, I think everybody wants that, at least in part. They may not need it all the time, but I think people still want that. And so I do think that people are going to be connected. But I think the gift of this time is that we have now broken whatever barriers were there that were keeping us from connecting these other ways too.
I'm looking forward to getting back into the sanctuary and seeing people. My biggest fear is that our numbers will drop, but I'm not real sure about that. My biggest hope is that this will get my folks to looking outside of our congregation rather than being insular as they have been for a while. So hopefully it'll be, hey, we can go out now. Let's go out of the church doors rather than just staying in here. So that's my biggest hope, is trying to encourage them. Let's get out and go out into the world.
I think I share the same anxieties that have already been shared. The ideas of will will folks come back, or will they come back at the same rhythm and level that they did or not? I think a part of that too is, even just a change in for the folks who do decide to come back and come back often. Will they feel, hey, this is different, or my neighbors aren't here anymore, or I don't see these people as often. So I worry both for those, those who will come back and those who won't, and vice versa. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. But we're doing a lot of the things that Randy was just talking about. We actually had sort of a test run last night, but outfitting our rooms for the hybrid meetings, hybrid group studies, all those other kinds of things, because we saw that very same thing, both with we had a really successful Lenten study, and also with committee meetings, in that many folks who weren't able to attend meetings were. And I think it will be able to continue to do that. Same thing with the studies. Joining from your house at 7:00 at night is a whole different ball game than having to drive to the church and do some kind of study like that. And it, especially younger families, you don't have to get a sitter if you're still in the house, and if they'll let you kind of do some things. So I think that's a growing edge that we've got to continue to explore, of how to do the hybrid, the online, both and try to keep everybody feeling connected in that kind of way. We've even thought about, big fellowship events that we have in our fellowship hall. I'm sure you all have the same discussion of what time do we have this, because when is sundown, and when will people feel some of our older adults, will they feel comfortable driving home if we end after a certain day? So the pandemic has shown us, we had a very good portion of our older adults who learned the technology and were able to Zoom. And so we were, have been thinking, do we have some fellowship event? And then are some of our folks either in facilities or who can't drive after dark, can they Zoom in? I think all those things are a heavy lift too. So it's going to take some work and some intention to do that. So I'm hopeful for the reshaping and reforming of the community and the process, and for us, at least the process we're following here coming out of COVID is getting sort of reacquainted with our mission, with our priorities that we established right before COVID, and really doubling down and engaging the congregation on implementing those.
My fear is the same one that's been voiced by everyone. In fact, I'm hearing from more and more of our senior adults, particularly those that are 85 and over. I'm not sure we'll ever see those again. I've got real concern. It's, the pandemic has scared them. It's difficult for them to get out, but they've made the effort in the past. But now I've got some real fears there, and that's going to be sad. But I'm hopeful on two regards. One, during the pandemic, we had a group of people that responded that started a feeding program we have a partnership with an elementary school. And so during the pandemic, we collected over $35,000 to do weekly meals. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to live into that. That was something that was positive that came out of the pandemic. And so I'm hopeful that some things that we learned we'll continue to do. The other thing I'm hopeful for, and I already started trying to live into this hope, is I've seen people really transform by traveling together, different places, and engaging difficult situations. And so was working yesterday with an African-American leader in town, and one of our church members. We're planning a civil rights trip in November with 10 whites and 10 blacks, but beginning to hope that we can continue to live into some things like that, because I think those are really transformative type of trips. And I've even already got a trip planned to Palestine next February, and hopeful that we can continue and start doing some of those things again.
COVID hasn't been the source of our troubles, but we've lost way more than normal members in the last year. Not probably a half to 2/3 more than would be a typical year for us. And we've also had several moves. We've had several folks who were in, early retirement, and their children are in, far away places. And I think the shutdown made them feel like, we need to be close to our people. And so we've had 2 or 3 families who have just gone ahead and moved. And that's hard. That combination of moves and deaths without the usual way of receiving new members. Yeah. That's been hard. And we that will have some impact.
We actually did have some new members during COVID. We figured that out creatively in the summer for the first time, and we weren't really able to have a class, but I think with the exception of one couple, everybody who has joined in the last year were people that had some connection to the church before when we were still meeting in person. And the couple who joined are both, ruling elders and, leaders from another Presbyterian congregation who just happened to retire here during COVID. So I feel like they're, they already are fully invested in church. But right, those people haven't been integrated into our life, and they met the session members on Zoom when we received them that way. But and we used Zoom clips of welcoming them in worship. We added that as a worship element over time. But people know them from their face on a Zoom screen. They don't know them more extensively than that. So that's very different. But Kim was talking, one other thing I wanted to say that is a hopeful thing. I don't really know how all of this will work for us because it's totally new. But one of the things that technology has enabled us to do is to be better connected to people who couldn't be connected before, like Kim was saying, homebound. But one of the other things for us, because of the uniqueness of this congregation too, is that we have people who leave here and go other places at different times of the year who've been able to stay connected. But we also have folks who've left this area to go live closer to children in Arizona or, where, I don't know, Delaware, Pennsylvania. And they're participating in church again. I mean, because they can worship online and they can, post a message in the chat and communicate with people that they used to sit with in the pews. That's a new thing for us, and we don't know how to navigate and support those people well yet. That's a new thing for us, but that's not going to be a huge group of people, but that is another new element of active church people who aren't physically in this community. And so that's going to be something new for us to navigate, which is exciting. But how do we stay connected to a church member who lives in Arizona?
In March of 2020, none of us anticipated that we'd be sitting here in almost June of 2021 saying, yeah, that light at the end of the tunnel is getting bigger, but there's a whole lot we don't know, and still not sure how it's going to work out. But
I still remember talking with a church member. I think it was the end of April of 2020. It was the first, it was right after the intense shutdown, when it was sort of like, gosh, what do you think? Can we sit 20 feet apart in somebody's driveway? And we're like, I don't know, I guess we can give it a try. And somebody there said, gosh, so you think we'll be back together by June? And I said, I don't know. I don't think so. Really? You're kidding.
yeah. The first real shock was when, I don't think we'll be back before the end of the summer.
Right. And I remember the first church that I heard who had already announced that, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and call it through December. I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you people?
They had more foresight than we realized. But thank you all so much, and
thanks, Ken.
Have a great weekend, and
thank you, Ken.
Memorial Day weekend.
Take care. Thank you so much. Good to see you all.
In spite of all the challenges these folks have faced, I continue to be amazed at their resilience, their hope, and their faith. And I know they represent most of our pastors who seek to be faithful to the Holy Spirit's leading in these difficult times. We will be taking an intentional break over the summer months as my family and I do some long-awaited traveling. I look forward to being back with you in late summer and pray for health, strength, and refreshment for you this summer as well. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your leadership of Christ's body. I'm Ken Broman, folks, and this is Pastors for Pastors.